Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk AppSecOps. My name is Mark Lambert, Chief Product Officer here at ArmorCode, and I'm joined by my good friend, Andrew Gorecki. How are you doing, Andrew?
Hi, Mark. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, very well. We're very excited to have you on the show. You're Senior Manager of Professional Services at CrowdStrike, previously at IBM, and I know an avid Purple Book community member as well. Thoroughly enjoyed having you on our Christmas LinkedIn Live. That was a great conversation, and being on other things that we've done together as well. And I think, we discussed a few things during that LinkedIn Live that I'd like to bring back and just talk about. And really, the area that I think would be good to dig into today is ransomware and threat intelligence and how we can use these things to help with our software security programs, how it unifies with ASPM, how it unifies with vulnerability management. What are your thoughts in this area? Kind of like, what is your general view of where we're at from an industry, from a ransomware perspective, and what we need to be focusing on?
So I think ransomware is one of those threats that is pretty well understood at this point, but I think it's also one of those threats that is here to stay. So my personal experience with ransomware is, well, that the cybercrime ecosystem that is behind ransomware has exploded and it's standardized. So a lot of the ransomware attacks, they are essentially follow a playbook type of scenario. They are well understood, and that's why I think it's very important to leverage threat intelligence. But one important thing to note about ransomware is that there are also a lot of misconceptions around the threat. And my personal experience is that most of the organizations that become victim of ransomware typically have fundamental issues with security or security hygiene. And the reason why I speak about threat intelligence and ransomware together is because I think no organization has limited resources to protect themselves, but also because the threat intel is available at least about the most prolific threat groups. You can leverage that threat intel to baseline your defenses and determine how well your organization is protected against ransomware, but also direct resources towards, those security areas that will lead to sort of the most positive outcomes instead of focusing on hypothetical threats that may not even be applicable to your environments.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the area that I've been noticing as well, as we look at just the volume of data that's thrown at us, findings and vulnerabilities, and you just have to prioritize these things. So threat intelligence gives us that, if there's an exploit, and then as you start using commercial threat intelligence fields, you get more visibility into the threat actors and what have you. So yeah, I think that's a very important aspect.
Yeah. I personally think that security is really a big data problem. Of course, putting compliance aside, if you look at threats, threat detection, response, I think it's really a big data problem. It's about finding the proverbial needle in a haystack. And without the right tools and without context and threat intel, I think it's just an impossible task.
Can we leverage industry trends and things like that to further help us focus? I mean, when you look at ransomware, are certain threat actors targeting certain industries, certain types of applications? Is there a way of knowing if you're more susceptible or if you're a stronger target, or do you just kind of have to look at the industry as a whole?
Well, so I think it depends what type of threat you focus on. When it comes to cybercrime and ransomware, it's really all about monetizing essentially opportunities. So typically, cyber criminals go for the low-hanging fruit and the most insecure organizations, regardless of industry. Because I call ransomware essentially a commodity threat. It's well understood. But when it comes to like kind of more specialized threats like espionage, stealing intellectual property, or going after specific data, and then we move towards kind of industries. So, for example, the banking industry has its own challenges. Health industry has its own challenges. So, I would say it depends on the type of threat that you are trying to protect yourself against. When it comes to ransomware, I think everyone should be looking into it because it's a commodity threat, can impact any organization. But when it comes to apologies. Things like espionage, then it's becoming industry specific.
Okay, so really kind of like categorizing these things, and this is where threat intelligence can help you, right? So you can start to filter in and focus in as appropriate.
Yeah.
Where does if what's your experience of as something pops, right? As we start seeing that, hey, that this is being exercise. Are there any leading indicators that can kind of give us a little bit of a head start to know that, hey, there's something coming? Because obviously there's always a lag of information.
Yeah. Yes. So typically when we talk about the more sophisticated or more prolific attacks, it's not on and off. It's typically, an attack would follow a typical life cycle. So the threat actor has to compromise some specific asset to gain unauthorized access to your environment. Typically that access, happens with, I would say, non-privileged user or non-privileged set of credentials. They have to escalate privileges, move largely, then further escalate privileges, maybe gain access to your authentication systems. So that's a series of activities, and each of those activities essentially provides opportunities for detection and response. So I sometimes say to clients that having an incident, it's not a big deal. But detecting an incident in the later phases of the life cycle typically leads to disruptive remediation, and it can cause serious business problems. For example, if there's data theft. But if someone compromises a user through a social engineering attack, or maybe even a brute force attack, or reuses credentials stolen from during another breach, and you detect the attack in the early phases, like the initial compromise or a privileged escalation attempt, you remediate it and you're confident that you contain it, it's not a big deal. However, an attacker has the time to plant malware on various systems, move largely. That's when you move into what I call enterprise incident response. You have a big incident and potentially a big impact to your organization. So it's not binary. Typically, I would encourage most organizations to leverage threat intel to detect incidents in the early phases of the life cycle, because that's how you prevent business impact.
Got it. So I mean, it really is just kind of like fix early, fix often, and then you're probably, it's like you're avoiding the big cost later in the process.
Exactly. It's like detecting someone trespassing your property when they are kind of just outside of the house or trying to, check the door, versus when having actually someone, stealing actually, valuables from the house, and you see them when they actually run away with the valuables. Yeah. So if we can identify vulnerabilities in our systems that have exploits, which are those front door exploits, we can address those quicker. It saves a lot of time later. So really active exploits, leveraging threat intelligence to prioritize those above the theoretical ones that you said at the beginning. And that's how we can really optimize the process and fix those things early. Yeah. Even like prioritizing vulnerabilities, I think for me to a certain degree is a big data problem, because you cannot fix all the vulnerabilities. But I think a lot of vulnerabilities are kind of theoretical, I would say, or the result of academic research. The question that I have is the vulnerability weaponized? And if so, is it exploited in the wild? So I think when it comes to vulnerability exploitation, there's also context that is very important, because I think most of the organizations that I have worked with had issues mitigating all the vulnerabilities, because at the end of the day, if you run production systems and let's say you're a bank, you cannot afford downtime to patch systems. So it really becomes a problem of prioritization and risk analysis. So yeah, I think vulnerability is also kind of a big data problem, because you have to contextualize the data to make informed decisions.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because you got this vulnerability, there's a known vulnerability, it's being exploited. We have, more ransomware threat actors, leveraging it. So that makes it more important. But the business context of where is that within my organization? If it's in, I always use this example of a front-end web application or a back-end data sciences application. It's like, that one over there is probably not as important for the business and probably harder to compromise than the front-facing, internet-facing application. So
exactly. And also from a vulnerability perspective, you need to ask yourself, would the vulnerability provide an entry point for an attacker to an environment? or the vulnerability typically is exploited as part of a later phase of the attack life cycle, which means that the certain things have to happen before the attacker can even leverage the vulnerability to escalate privileges or bypass certain, let's say, authentication mechanisms.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really important point. That and does threat intelligence help you with that, or are you going to have to just put in the legwork and review those and categorize those internally?
So I personally think that, first of all, you have to know your assets. Without knowing your assets and understanding your network, it's very difficult to prioritize your vulnerabilities. But also, I think you need to partner really with external organizations and vendors. Because let's say if I'm a healthcare organization, my core business mission is to provide healthcare services to patients, not to run a threat intelligence center and essentially have a team of people who just prioritize those vulnerabilities. For certain vulnerabilities, or I would say commodity threats that are well understood, I think you can source that information much cheaper from outside. And what you really need to focus on is what is very specific to your organization.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Well, I mean, this is a great conversation. Thank you for coming back and going into this in more detail than we had during the LinkedIn Live. With that being said, we're at a wrap. So, Andrew, thank you again. Really appreciated the conversation today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and stay tuned for one of our upcoming episodes.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hi everyone, Let's Talk AppSecOps is going on the road. We're going to be live from RSA 2023, so if you can't make it, join us virtually. We'll do an expo tour, we'll do a highlight reel, we're going to do some great interviews with folks talking about the software security practices. We're going to see what's new. If you can come, check it out, track me down, let's have a quick chat. Would love to get you on camera. Take care, enjoy the next episode.